This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there, welcome to this edition of Global Business Africa. In the next hour, we'll run through the business news stories you need to know about from the continent and beyond. But first, an update from the markets. Now, the second quarter thus far has been pretty negative for the bourses in Nigeria and South Africa. The All Share Nigeria, for instance, has fallen by 3.25%. The top 40 in South Africa is down by 2.33% over the same period. MSCI, in fact, was warning a little earlier today that if there's no improvement in the ease of moving funds out of Nigerian equities, it will have to reclassify Nigeria to being a standalone market status. In East Africa, Equity Bank's announcement that it would be resuming dividend payments in 2022 seems to have gotten a fair bit of love from the markets today. It hit a 15-month high, taking its year-to-date gain close to 28%. We'll also be speaking to the CEO of Kenya Airways in 15 minutes for status updates on the business amidst delays in capital injections and renationalization, even as the business pivots into UAV logistics. But first, here are your headlines. Tanzania's President Samia Suluhu Hassan marks 100 days in office. We'll examine her performance record so far. We'll have a status update on Kenya Airways and the changes it's making in its turnaround plan. And EU leaders have rejected a proposal to resume talks with Russia. All that and more is in the pipeline for you tonight. But we're starting the hour in Tanzania. The East African nation registered 92 large investment projects worth roughly $3.5 billion between March and June this year. Now, that's a 36.7% rise in the number of investment projects coming in compared to the corresponding period last year, when a total of 68 projects worth just $321 million were registered. The value of investments has also soared significantly. It's gone up by over 700% in the last 3 months compared to the same period in 2020. President Samia Suluhu Hassan has been on a mission ever since she became the country's 6th head of state to restore investor confidence and attract private sector investment ever since she got into office. So far, she's made 2 international trips to her neighboring allies in Kenya and Uganda. A visit to Kenya was the first time a Tanzanian leader was in the country since 2016. President Hassan this weekend marks 100 days in office following the sudden death of her predecessor, John Pombe Magufuli. All right then, so let's examine her legacy thus far. Konstantin Manda is the director of the Impact Evaluation Lab at Tanzania's Economic and Social Research Foundation. Joins us from Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. Thank you for your time this evening. So if you're grading President Hassan's performance on economic policy over the last 100 days, what grade would you give her and why?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, I think it's a little bit hard to tell, given that it's only been 100 days. And just to paraphrase former President US Barack Obama, the government in Tanzania is very similar to kind of a big ocean liner. So it's not going to be easy to pivot. I think the biggest changes that President Samia has incorporated in her 100 years in office have been around how to handle the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic. So for instance, recently, Tanzania has officially entered the COVAX facility, which will enable us to finally be able to procure and receive COVID-19 vaccines. So I think in that respect, and when you look at some of these African business leaders, including Mohamed Dewji, Mo Dewji, who's a Tanzanian businessman, Aliko Dangote, the Nigerian businessman, both making comments that they're optimistic about the private investment climate with respect to the Tanzanian government's stance on private investment. And so when you put those two things together, the only way that I think we would expect major economic growth in the remaining quarters of this year, and indeed in the remaining term that she has until 2025, would be to spur private investment and to encourage tourism. And you cannot do that without facing COVID-19 and without really encouraging the population to get vaccinated. So I think that's the area where she has made the most changes in terms of her administration.
But
So when
there
you look
still
at,
is,
for
but there
example,
still is a
Google Trends
significant data gap, isn't there? Because we still haven't seen large-scale, daily updated information on COVID testings. What's the caseload? What variants are prevalent in Tanzania? That's still critical information in trying to figure out how to solve the COVID-19 problem in Tanzania, isn't it?
So the government has argued that the lack of publishing of data does not necessarily imply that no data has been tracked. So if we imagine, given that you don't want the virus to keep circulating among the population with increasing variation as it keeps going through the population, you are correct that we have to definitely mitigate the spread of the virus. And it will depend on how soon the Tanzanian government begins to publish that data again. Now, one of the requirements, I believe, with getting some of the financial assistance from the IMF, for instance, require that we go back to publishing that data. Now, whether that's going to be this week or a few months from now, we don't know. But we certainly imagine President Samia leading that process, because she's in some ways made the biggest changes in her running of the government in COVID-19 area. So when you look at, for example, I took a look at Google Trends data recently, and if you type the word mask in Kiswahili, barakoa, you have a huge uptick this week, as high as it was in April of last year. So you're already starting to sense that the new presidency has awakened the Tanzanian public in ways that they were as vigilant as they were in last April.
Indeed. So on the financial side, last June, Tanzania asked for, I believe it was $14.3 million in debt relief from the IMF. They got that. There's an option of extending that to another $25 million or so in the next year or so, up to the middle of 2022. The country also secured debt relief from the Paris Club. But is there further need for debt restructuring in Tanzania, given the economic damage that COVID-19 has inflicted pretty much, around the region?
I think there is a lot of scope because, for one, a lot of the public works projects that she inherited will continue. There are going to be new public works as well. That's kind of bring in a lot of jobs. In terms of liquidity, once Tanzania, given that her presidency has signaled a change in posture with respect to the pandemic, you're going to start to see increasing numbers of tourism this summer as we head into the kind of high season of the tourism market here in Tanzania. And if you have a president who is signaling that, we are welcoming private investors, including both domestic and foreign private investors, there would be a very difficult worst case scenario in order for that to really curb the growth in investment. And there's certainly scope to restructure Tanzania's debt, provided there is going to be continued liquidity in the market. And the government has already made steps with respect to the last 12 months, but certainly most recently under President Samia, with how it targets liquidity with respect to the pandemic.
Indeed. Let's see how this plays out. Looking forward to seeing some regular reporting on COVID cases from Tanzania. That's Constantine Manda. He's the director of the Impact Evaluation Lab from the Economic and Social Research Foundation in Tanzania. Thank you for your time. Now, on to Tunisia. The central bank governor over there has called for an urgent plan to jumpstart the country's battered economy. It contracted by a record level, 8.8% last year. As CGTN's Adin Chouachi now reports, the recovery plan in Tunisia will be based on an innovative financing mechanism for the restructuring of companies that have suffered some pretty bad damage amidst this pandemic.
The governor of Tunisia's Apex Bank, Maroun Al-Abbasi, explained that the economic recovery plan focuses on strengthening the equity of companies and adopting an innovative mechanism to support companies with large production capacities. Al-Abbasi also urged the government to present the supplementary state budget.
We're supporting the companies in difficulty because Tunisia is facing a very difficult period. Yet the central bank has asked the government to present the 2021 supplementary budget before the end of July and August. Otherwise, we'll not be able to finance the budget until the end of the year.
The proposed economic recovery plan is based on the partnership between the various operators, state, banks, donors and foreign partners. The central bank governor also encouraged the private sector to invest in the restructuring funds.
Tunisia needs to direct considerable funds to investment. We need to pour money into investment in restructuring funds and save ailing companies, which can later contribute to the economic rebound, preserve jobs, and create new economic opportunities.
Experts noted that it is impossible to continue the financing and structuring of public companies due to their high level of indebtedness.
Tunisia's public sector wage bill is among the highest in the world. All the successive governments have failed to restructure public companies. Any economic recovery plan starts with limiting the losses of the state-owned enterprises.
The Central Bank of Tunisia has presented to the government an exceptional COVID-19 financing line that could be paid over 7 years and which has a grace period of 2 years. Analysts assert that the government needs to approve new measures to help businesses cope with the negative impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. In addition, Tunisia is facing several challenges due to the lack of economic and political visibility. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
All right, then a quick run through some company news. Let's start with Google. It's announced that it's rolling out a multi-million-dollar grant program to support women and black-owned startups across the African continent. Now, the programs are expected to benefit 50 budding startups in at least 13 different African countries. They include the annual Google for Startups Accelerator class and the $3 million Black Founders Fund. Google has also launched a $3 million grant for the Tony Elumelu Foundation to support female entrepreneurs. Also, Microsoft has unveiled the next generation of its Windows software, Windows 11, that has the start menu and other new features changed, revamped, tweaked a little bit, or drastically overhauled in others. Now, the newest version of the flagship OS will be a successor to today's Windows 10, which the company introduced back in 2015. Windows 11 is expected to become available later this year on new computers and other devices, and it might be a free update for those who have Windows 10 if you have the supporting hardware. David Brown is set to step down as the CEO of Zimbabwe's Kovimba mining house. Appointing its replacement, however, highlights questions of control and ownership. The government says that together with state-controlled entities, it owns 65% of Kovimba. But documents seen by Bloomberg show how, through a complex series of transactions, the assets that actually form the core of its holdings were until recently either owned by or tied to Kudakwashe Tagwire, who was sanctioned by for corruption by the United States just last year. And finally, the U.S. aviation safety regulator, the FAA, has granted Richard Branson's spaceship company, Virgin Galactic, the license it needs to fly passengers on future space flights. Virgin Galactic's stock price jumped by as much as 22% in early trading in the wake of that announcement. Its shares rose close to $50 this week after a rather rough start to the year. That saw the stock climb above $60 in February, then fall as low as $15 just last month before rebounding. That's a run through your company headlines. We're 15 minutes into the hour. We'll be back with more news in 60 seconds.
As we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business, only on CGTN.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN. See the difference. Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
South Africa's landfill sites are expected to be full in a few years. That's according to a new report. It's called the Recycling of Waste and Scrap in South Africa 2021. Essentially, it shows that South Africa generates 108 million tons of waste every year. 90% of that ends up in landfills. The country's economic hub of Gauteng province, for example, accounts for roughly 45% of the entire country's municipal waste, and it has not been granted new permits for landfills in 2 decades. CGTN's Yulisa Njamela takes up the story.
The report asserts that South Africa's slow progress in recycling is evidenced by the Polokwane Declaration on Waste Management's target of reaching zero waste to landfill by 2022 being revised to a target of 50% of waste to landfill by 2025. According to South Africa's Environmental Affairs Department, much of the waste in the country's oceans, rivers and waterways is due to littering, inadequate waste management and overflowing landfills.
Lack of resources and the ever-increasing populations contribute to more waste, making it difficult to collect and dispose of properly.
Over the past few years, with urbanization, there's been an increase in terms of the amount of waste that gets generated, especially the bigger urban centers in South Africa. There are still pockets of challenges in the country. The growth of South African population also meant that there's an increasing number of people, and that municipalities have had to deal with increasing waste volumes as well.
Our population is drastically growing. Modernization, urbanization, we tend to consume even like things that we don't necessarily need. Or there is even like production of things that we don't necessarily need, but we have gotten into a habit of just buying and throwing away. So it's very big that it's threatening our own environment that we depend upon for resources. It's threatening the marine ecosystems, terrestrial and freshwater ecosystems that we depend solely upon for survival as human beings as well.
The World Wildlife Fund is a leading organization in wildlife conservation and endangered species. In order to mitigate the issue, last year, the Cabinet approved the National Waste Management Strategy.
It rather introduces a new concept of circular economy. Now, circularization of waste means that it brings in a totally new regime altogether, something we never had before, which means that it places the burden now on the producers to start looking at how, when they produce a package, they are going to make sure that it doesn't go to landfill sites, it comes back to be reused, and hence the circular economy.
While the situation is clearly dire, South Africans are joining in to find solutions. Imagined Earth is one of those companies. The company pays people to recycle using these innovative machines.
We're trying to harness the power of technology by using the latest in tech, that being our machines, and making it an interactive and engaging experience, because in doing so, we believe that people will be more inclined to use it more. We also believe in the principle of paying people for their recyclable waste.
Waste pickers are also playing a critical role in terms of minimizing the amount of waste that goes to the landfill sites. Yulisa Njamela for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Kenya's economy largely depends on rain-fed agriculture, but there are fears that illegal charcoal burning now poses a critical threat to food production and exports too. CGTN's Nick Mudimba caught up with charcoal producers in Kenya's coastal region. He reports now on how their economic interests are colliding with the country's environmental protection goals.
Droughts have continuously threatened Kenya's food security, and one of the practices affecting water catchment areas is charcoal burning. We meet Franklin Katana in Kenya's Kilifi County. He has been in the charcoal burning business for more than 20 years now. He says it has provided for him economically, but this has come at a cost.
Burning charcoal is very dangerous to one's health because of the dirt, and we sometimes get respiratory diseases. I don't have any job. This is what I depend on.
It helps us with food, clothing and schooling our children. We fall sick most of the time, but we always come back here to the bushes after receiving treatment. The authorities come here and arrest us, but once we come out of custody, we continue burning charcoal.
These bushes are now being prepared for a traditional kiln set up to burn charcoal. Almost 10 tons of wood are used to produce a ton of charcoal. The economic interests of local communities have clashed with the country's environmental protection goals. Environmentalists warn that charcoal burning and the resultant carbon emissions continue to pose a huge threat to the environment.
Carbon is one of the great contributors to global warming. Yes, we have other gases. We have carbon, we have methane. Methane is the most dangerous among all the other gases, but carbon is the most dangerous because of its volume. But in terms of size, and it's dangerous in terms of size, methane is the worst. When you come to charcoal, charcoal contributes to carbon monoxide, and it has a carbon element, even the carbon dioxide here. So when you're talking about charcoal element, people who actually end up using the charcoal, one, they'll end up having health issues, respiratory problems due to breathing in this carbon. Also, they'll have problems of eyesight, all these problems. And compounding to this, they'll have problems of global warming because this carbon actually contributes to the greenhouse gases.
The repercussions and the effects of cutting trees and burning charcoal is something they've never heard of. The main priority is to keep their families well fed and, of course, their pockets full. For now, they're also crying for help. The help is also about just being given education, for the effects are really disturbing. Nick Modimba, CGTN, Kilifi County, Kenya.
All right, then, let's focus on the aviation sector in Kenya. Kenya Airways, the majority state-owned carrier, has downsized its fleet and its staff count last year, but it's still unclear exactly how much cash the airline may get from its biggest shareholder, the Kenyan government, as part of its turnaround plan. However, it is betting on a combination of revenue from cargo, expansions into Central Africa, and a gradual shift to productivity-linked pay to remain as a going concern. Now, by the end of 2020, the airline had shrunk its staff headcount by over 1,100. It has also reduced its wage bill, by extension, by at least $2.5 million. But these changes have also drastically cut the number of women in top management. It's lowered the percentage from 60% before the pandemic to 25% at the end of 2020. Now, the airline also had a cash burn rate of roughly $2 million a day in 2020, even as passenger traffic fell by almost 66% and revenue per passenger kilometers fell by 73%. In 2020, the airline carried 1.8 million passengers, but a big chunk of that traffic was concentrated in the first quarter of the year. Last year, the Kenyan government provided at least $100 million in shareholder loans to keep the airline afloat. Earlier today, I spoke to the airline's CEO, Alan Kilavuka. He started our conversation by pointing out that he expects the airline will exceed its cargo traffic this year compared to the nearly 42,000 tons that it moved in 2020.
And even our load factors are still quite low, averaging about between 55 to 60% across our network. So difficult still. However, I have to add that the team here has been working extremely hard to contain costs and conserve cash, because that is a big thing now. My own view and the view of the management and board is that what we need to do is to contain our costs for now, make sure that the airline is steady for the next 18 to 24 months.
Last year, your cargo tonnage was around 49,000 tons. Will you be able to match that number this year?
Yes, we will be able to surpass that number. We estimate that we'll move it by at least 30% on top of that because of increased capacity.
Okay, what's your current cash burn rate? Because I'm just doing a very quick back of the envelope calculation, because if your operating costs last year were around 79, 80 billion Kenyan shillings. That works out almost 220 or so million shillings a day, about $2 million, give or take. Is that still the cash burn rate you're looking at for 2021?
Yes, it is. But what we have done is to improve that, to improve the cash burn, is we've gotten into very good negotiations with our lessors. What that has helped us to do is to increase the cash payouts to lessors. So we changed the contract terms, amended the contract terms for 2021, so that what now we are paying out to them is only what we call flying by the hour or power by the hour.
So it's almost like a pay-as-you-go approach, essentially.
Pay-as-you-go. Yeah, that's actually a simpler way to put it. And apart from the maintenance reserve, which of course we still need to pay, but in terms of the rental, we are paying by the hour. That is very important for us because it has helped us to conserve about $45 million for 2021. And, accounting-wise may not be a big difference because of the way we account for lessors, but from a cash perspective, very important for us.
Last year was fantastic as far as fuel prices are concerned. We saw Brent, falling to levels we've not seen in years. But this year alone, in the first 6 months of 2021, we've seen Brent going up by at least 45%. We're now looking at a barrel of crude at around $75 a barrel. So how are you approaching fuel cost management? Are you approaching it on a day-to-day basis, or are you just hedging short-term needs?
We typically hedge about 35% based on the board mandate. Last year, exactly to your point, we didn't apply the hedge, and that was good. Now, that's particularly for the second half of the year. And this year, there are so many moving pieces. One, the volatility is quite high. So, of course, the best strategy would be to hedge. But what we've decided to do is to watch the prices on a day-to-day basis, to your point. But it is a day-to-day basis because of the volatility, and also premiums are quite high right now. So we need to look at the cost benefit of hedging.
And I'll get to that in just a moment. But before we get into the growth side of things, the other thing that struck me about KQ is the fact that you're also at the heart of conversations with the IMF as well. Because one of the conditions with our $2.34 billion program is that we need to restructure. Some of the SOEs are essentially a drag on the public balance sheet. My question to you, though, is why was it necessary to bring in an external party to help the airline with this restructuring process? Because as a Kenyan citizen, my argument would be your management, you know where the pain points are. We're trying to keep costs down. So why bring in a third party that's going to charge you more to essentially develop a restructuring plan?
Rama, the answer to that is actually quite simple. It's because we were required to. I do agree with you. I have a lot of confidence in the strategies that we put into place. But remember, we are relying on external capital. We are relying on external funding, which is government in this case. So government also needs to be comfortable that we have our strategies, the ones we have presented to them, can be checked by a third party who is an expert in aviation and confirmed to be the right strategies. So they are not necessarily coming in to turn around the airline, because that has been a misconception. But they're coming in to look at the strategies that we put into place, agree with them, or maybe disagree with them, also give us additional feedback on where they think we can improve.
When is the report expected to be out? It's end of July or is it end of June?
Yes, correct. By end of July.
End of July, okay. But who's covering the bill for these consultants? Is that being thrown onto KQ's balance sheet, or is that going onto the government balance sheet?
No, it is KQ. But remember, government has funded us. So as part of the funding, they're requiring us to do this exercise.
Let's head over to West Africa. Nigeria's government is embarking on a rather ambitious poverty reduction program that aims to lift at least 100 million of its citizens, it's basically half the entire country, out of poverty over the next 10 years. President Muhammadu Buhari recently set up a body headed by the country's Vice President, Yemi Osinbajo, to drive the process by coming up with the ways and means of achieving that ambitious goal. Nigeria has among the highest poverty rates in the world. Roughly 40% of its population lives below the country's poverty line. Here's Deji Badmus with the details.
To lift 100 million people out of poverty over a 10-year period is no mean task. It's even much difficult for an economy that has suffered 2 bouts of recession in a period of 4 years and population growth continues to outpace economic growth.
If India can lift 271 million people out of poverty between 2006 and 2016, Nigeria can surely lift 100 million out of poverty in 10 years. Fortunately, we have already started, but we need to unlock the challenges of slow implementation, inappropriate targeting, and absence of adequate resources.
It's those challenges that the body headed by the Vice President is expected to unlock. Vice President Oshibajo's National Steering Committee is tasked with the responsibility of working out the strategies through which the objective can be achieved.
General improvements in the enhanced access to social and economic infrastructure will surely boost labor income by creating higher numbers of decent jobs, as well as absorbing new entrants into the labor market. But to truly break the yoke of poverty, the strategy is also hinged on targeted interventions through redistributive and social protection programs aimed at the poorest and the most vulnerable. Thus, this strategy is hinged on a vision of greater productivity and efficient redistribution, which we hope will result in a rising tide that lifts all boats above the poverty line.
Nigeria's national poverty line is around $335 per year. As of 2019, the country's National Bureau of Statistics estimates around 83 million Nigerians live below that poverty line. The World Bank recently said surging inflation and rising food prices may have pushed an estimated 7 million Nigerians below the poverty line in 2020, and that 11 million may fall into poverty by 2022 as a result of COVID-19-induced crisis. All of this are clear pointers of the enormity of the target the government has set for itself.
So I would say it's very ambitious, but it is not impossible. It's depending on the political will. So for us to see how we want to implement policies that will create the jobs. So and it's really very possible. We can create those jobs in Nigeria. What currently is happening is when you look at our import bill, it means that we're creating jobs for jobs abroad because we export raw materials and we import finished goods. So once we're able to do some of these things, and I think it's not really impossible, but we need to be very deliberate about it.
As at the last quarter of 2020, Nigeria's unemployment rate stood at 33.3%. The government must cut down on that number to be able to meet its poverty reduction target. It is currently running several initiatives to create more jobs. But experts say perhaps the biggest threat against the government's poverty reduction plan is insecurity, which is driving up especially food inflation in the country. Deji Batmos, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
On to another oil-producing state. South Sudan's Ministry of Petroleum has announced the launch of the country's first oil licensing round. Now, the ministry has identified new exploration blocks with potential hydrocarbon deposits and has compiled the data to provide to interested investors, operators and counterparties. Now, according to the analysis commissioned by the ministry, roughly 90% of the country's oil and gas reserves remain unexploited, and that provides interesting opportunities to international investors. This bidding round is for a number of selected blocks which will be facilitated and evaluated by the criteria set by the ministry. Right now, there are 3 consortiums operating producing blocks in South Sudan, with another 4 oil operating companies having acquired production sharing contracts. You're watching Global Business Africa. Time for a short break. Here's what's on the other side. EU leaders reject a proposal to resume formal talks with Russia. And the US economy grew by more than 6% in the first quarter of 2021.
It's just taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. Let's run through some of the stories making your headlines at this hour. A latest report by the United Nations Development Programme reveals that the more than 10 years of battling the insurgency in northeastern Nigeria may have claimed nearly 350,000 lives. It's being described as one of the worst humanitarian crises in the world. More than 9 out of 10 of those killed are children younger than 5. The armed group Boko Haram launched an uprising in 2009, displacing more than 2 million people from their homes. The African Centre for Disease Control and Prevention, the Africa CDC in effect, is warning that the third wave of COVID infections, which is now affecting more than 20 countries in Africa, could have a much more devastating impact than ever seen since the start of this pandemic on the continent. Africa CDC Director John Kengasong emphasized that the third COVID-19 wave is a lot more aggressive and the variants are spreading a lot more rapidly right across the continent. And the US President Joe Biden will have his first face-to-face meeting with his Afghan counterpart Ashraf Ghani at the White House later today. They're expected to discuss Washington's support for Afghanistan's government as American troops pull out. Afghan forces have been struggling to repel Taliban advances. Mr. Biden announced on Thursday that 9,000 Afghan interpreters who worked with the US will be evacuated with their families before the September withdrawal date. That's a run through your headlines. European Union leaders have rejected a proposal to resume talks with Russia during the second day of the EU Leaders Summit. France and Germany wanted to cooperate with Moscow on things like climate change and to find ways of trying to sort of stabilize relations. But Poland and the Baltic states say that would send the entirely wrong message at a time when East-West ties are deteriorating. Italy, a big exporter to Russia with investment in Russian energy, also backed a summit with Moscow. The EU has already sanctions in place on the Russian energy, financial and arms sectors and personal sanctions on Russian leaders accused of human rights abuses or of using banned chemical weapons. The US economy grew at over 6% in the first 3 months of the year, according to the government's final estimate. With coronavirus case numbers still falling, some economists are now forecasting a double-digit growth number for the second quarter. Charles Gibson has this update from Washington.
The year began with coronavirus case numbers as high as they'd ever been, and rioters storming the US Capitol trying to undermine the peaceful transition of power.
Hello, sir.
Taking office on the 20th of January, the incoming US president was clear-eyed about the challenges the country was facing.
To contain a pandemic, to administer a vaccine, it's going to be the most consequential logistical thing that's ever been done in the United States. It's going to take a lot, an awful lot. We're going to rescue an economy.
Driven by vaccines and massive stimulus, the US economy did bounce back into growth in the first quarter at just under 6.5%.
The next stage of the recovery, though, is far more complicated. Vaccination rates are falling. More than 400,000 people filed for unemployment benefits last week, and inflation is pushing up prices for everyday goods like groceries and gas.
Chair Powell, please rise and raise your right hand.
Testifying on Capitol Hill this week, the chairman of the Federal Reserve explains some of the temporary causes of inflation.
This reflects, in part, the very low readings from early in the pandemic falling out of the calculation, the pass-through of price increases in oil prices to consumer energy prices, the rebound in spending as the economy continues to reopen, and the exacerbating factor of supply bottlenecks.
But Fed officials also publicly conceded this week that temporary could mean current high inflation levels lasting for the rest of this year. Giles Gibson for CGTN, Washington.
The COVID-19 pandemic has put the concept of remote learning front and center in education, pretty much up and down the entire chain. Now, that switch out of the classroom may at least be partly here to stay. But that in turn does assume that students actually have the technology at home to pull it off. And that's not always the case, as CGTN's Hendrik Sibrandi finds out.
26-year-old Metropolitan State University of Denver student Dominic Hunt was working in the school's Information Technology Services office when the pandemic hit last year. In-person classes gave way to remote learning. Students who didn't have laptop computers came calling for them.
We sometimes might not have had a supply available, and students might have to wait 2 months almost until they finally got a loaner laptop, so it really held them back.
His device, called Phonebook, features a smartphone dock tucked into a computer that has a screen and keyboard housing a battery pack, but no software of its own.
The phone that you have turns into a trackpad. That's the Phonebook experience.
We take it for granted that everybody does, but everybody doesn't. There are huge communities that have this huge deficit when it comes to accessing what we take for granted.
Especially in the developing world, where smartphones with relatively cheap data plans are everywhere and pricier laptops are not. Hunt, who grew up in Kenya, sees a country where his 3D printed device costing less than $100 could work well.
If they can have a 3D printer and manufacture it themselves, they can kind of be self-sustaining. Phonebook is easy to manufacture.
Hunt's Phonebook won second place in the Stanford Center on Longevity Design Challenge in April, beating more than 220 other international entries. The theme of this year's competition, innovating for a post-pandemic future. Hendrik Sibrandi, CGTN, Denver.
At the moment, European national football teams are competing head-on in the widely watched Euro 2020 tournament. But now some special Chinese players also making a visible presence on the sidelines of the pitches. Take a look.
Football-wise, this is about Europe's top teams battling it out. But from a sponsorship perspective, Euro 2020 is well and truly global. This time around, it's Chinese brands that have become the most noticeable. 4 of the 12 main sponsors of the tournament are from China, including digital payments firm Alipay.
Football is the very important universal language, and it also can help us to bridge all kinds of the people, around the world. That's why we're in line with UEFA. We have an 8-year deal.
The Hangzhou-based firm didn't disclose the deal's amount for contractual reasons, but said it's part of a wider strategy to take services that are well known in China to users around the world. Other Chinese brands on display are electronics maker Hisense, telecoms firm Vivo, and social media giant TikTok.
As things stand, the final is set to be played here at London's Wembley Stadium in front of 60,000 fans, with hundreds of millions more watching worldwide. But it's no longer just billboards that companies are vying for. In the digital age, the very way that brands are advertising at these mega events is also changing.
There's been such a move away from traditional, what we call sponsorship, where it's awareness, it's hospitality, it's signage, it's program ads, and much more around storytelling and activation and data and content. And you'll see that a number of the brands that have been involved in the sponsorship of the Euros, like Vivo and Alipay and TikTok, they're all innovative tech brands who are looking for innovative partnerships.
And it's not just football that many brands are eyeing. The power of sport is appealing for firms looking to boost their presence in new markets.
For other area, we're open to basketball, badminton, table tennis, because sports is the best lifestyle I think that people can enjoy. So we want to make their life easier.
The sponsors of major sports events have shifted in recent decades, signifying the rise of Asia in the global economy, from the Japanese brands in the 1980s to South Korean firms in the following decades. It's now Chinese players exhibiting on the world's biggest sporting stages. Nawid Jabakil, CGTN, London.
Chinese cross-border e-commerce platforms that sell products and services worldwide have also seen quite a bit of growth during the COVID-19 pandemic. But they're finding that they need something to boost their sales to an international audience. They need speakers of very different languages from their live streaming hosts and influencers. Chan Shishuan has that report on what's hot tonight.
For many in China, this is a common sight at home in the evenings, taking a look at their phone screens, watching favorite live stream hosts or hostesses, and hoping to get their ideal product at a cheaper price. But wait, what if the person watching that live stream is a foreigner? While foreign hosts are coming to the rescue of the Chinese cross-border live streams.
And also, they have not only one or two, they have three factories.
23-year-old Aslibek Konkujai from Uzbekistan has already done more than 40 live streams on cross-border e-commerce platforms in China since last year. He mainly promotes machinery and sports products to clients in the US or Europe. It was China's rapid development of online business that triggered his interest.
When I came, I was shocked because of infrastructure, because of the digitalization and a lot of advantages, which is very unique in this wonderful country. The e-commerce platform, which was shocked to me, it's also like e-payment, like fintech, right? A lot of apps, which is really convenient for your social lives.
And different from most live streaming that sells products to individual consumers, Aslibek is primarily promoting products to overseas corporate buyers, which means he can sometimes generate orders worth more than $120,000 with one show.
I also realized that I can connect people from my country, especially like sellers, especially entrepreneurs who are looking for some products here in China, and I can help them through this e-commerce platform to find all the products which they want. Live stream give me opportunity to find more suppliers, to understand better products, and build this better trust between sellers and entrepreneurs.
Cross-border e-commerce has become a vibrant force driving China's foreign trade, growing by almost 10 times during the past 5 years. Measured by either imports or exports, cross-border e-commerce has been expanding much faster than the overall foreign trade. And to keep up a strong growth pace, overseas live streaming hosts are just what the market needs. Cross-border e-commerce platform AliExpress started to see an uptick in overseas live streaming host numbers a year ago. And by now, it has several thousand.
We have our standards for hosts, so we've cooperated with some organizations to train them. Overseas hosts have a natural advantage in that they know more about the foreign market and consumers there, so they can solve their problems from their perspectives.
There are content and delivery regulations for China's live streaming industry, however. The problem is that the current Chinese regulations were not written for foreign language content.
Domestic platforms usually use Chinese to detect live streaming content, and those algorithms and technologies are not designed for use with English. Some domestic platforms have banned overseas hosts so as to avoid potential risks. In the future, cross-border e-commerce platforms in particular should improve their algorithm and technologies for English language broadcasts.
Given the booming cross-border e-commerce sector, however, clearer regulations could be coming. A State Council executive meeting on Tuesday heard that policies to support cross-border e-commerce development are on the way. Pilot zones for cross-border e-commerce will be expanded. The list of goods allowed for cross-border e-commerce retail imports will be fine-tuned, and management of cross-border imports and exports, returns and exchanges will be made more convenient. Zhang Shixuan, ICS for CGTN, Shanghai.
Quick run through commodity prices. Oil is our focus here. Just over $74 a barrel. WTI crude has gone up by over 53%. in barely 6 months. Now, part of the infrastructure plan that the US intends to roll out will apparently be funded by oil sales from the country's strategic reserves. Given where prices are at the moment, that sort of makes sense. The latest Baker Hughes rig count data shows no change in active drilling rigs in the US this week, but the number of active rigs in the US has gone up by 35%. With prices where they are, that certainly makes sense now that you have 470 active rigs at the moment. Copper forwards at the London Metals Exchange, they've been on a downward streak since late April. That trend continued this week. Contracts down as low as $9,414 a ton. So far in Q2, you're looking at a price increase of around 7.2%. Here's what's coming up next. We'll bring you the story of a Kenyan company that takes waste denim and turns that into luscious carpets.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. And no one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Welcome back. The fashion industry generates billions of dollars worldwide. They're the latest trends celebrated on the runway, in high-end retail stores, and of course on your Instagram feed. But beyond the glitz and the glamour, the industry also accounts for enormous amounts of waste. A lot of the pieces that are worn eventually end up in a landfill somewhere. But in Kenya, Africa Collect Textile is planning on reversing the fate of that textile waste. It's upcycling denim, turning that into carpets. Here's Beryl Oro with that story on Grassroots.
In 2018, Kenya imported about 176,000 tons of textile for the second-hand clothes market to feed the demand for Western fashion. But not all textile found at the market is made to last, and this leads to textile waste.
Yes, they're collecting stuff, they're using stuff, and it ends up in Africa. Of course, it has created jobs in Africa, like for example in Gekomba market or toy market. But at the end of the day, we have to ask ourselves, what happens then once the textiles are used here locally? And of course, the assumption it ends up in landfill, either in Dandora or within rivers and lakes.
The burden of textile waste in Africa is an inescapable reality. With ill-equipped and in many cases poorly funded garbage collection systems, most textile waste ends up in landfills. Africa Collect Textile is attempting to short-circuit this.
This is one of our collection centers. Is at 2 Grapes, Wines and Friends, whereby we have placed our collection containers, as you can see. And our main purpose here is to provide what we call like conveniency and strategic point to the people who live within Kilimani or within the vicinity of Kilimani, so that they can be able to come and donate their used textiles and footwear anonymously.
The pandemic had a direct impact on textile donation and people's ability to access drop-off points. This led to a change in the collection model.
We started telling people that we can also do what we call like door-to-door pickup, which has really picked up over the last 6 months.
Africa Collect Textile then delivers the sorted denim to Weaversworth. Founder of the organization, Rose Mwathi, has hired several women weavers to support the growing project. As a pioneer collaborator with Africa Collect Textile, every good product is critical to cement a positive local market response.
Sometimes the customers find, sometimes are not sure we will get there. But as we know, we try things out slowly until we get there, until we manage to do it.
The upcycling project currently utilizes denim and khaki material.
When it comes to the fact that you can utilize it in a way like this to make a carpet, it's very exciting and acceptable.
However, the team is seeking support to avoid downcycling the other textile waste that cannot be repurposed.
At the moment, we are working with the Engineers Without Borders, Netherlands. Still is in the process. We are trying to develop a machine, like for a local problem, for a local solution, whereby all the textile that cannot be reused again, for example, that is torn, is ripped, and it doesn't have any kind of purpose. We want to come up with material that is homogeneous, fluffy, and lightweight, and can be used now for pillow filling or sofa set filling, or and even construction industry.
The sale of the carpets has earned a market in Europe.
We already have a distributing company that deals with upcycling, selling of upcycling products. It's called Nick and Meek. They were interested with our rugs, and they would like to distribute it the whole of the Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg. That means we cannot sell that rug even directly to the countries like Netherlands.
It is said the beauty of denim is in its versatility. And thanks to Africa Collect Textile, every piece of denim can be repurposed to get a new lease of life, this time to dress the home. Beryl Oro, CGTN.
And finally, an all-vegetarian restaurant, bar and lounge has opened up in Dubai as the UAE is looking to accommodate a lot more vegans and vegetarians. Now, while most big restaurants these days offer entirely separate options and even dedicated menus, Epitome aims to be the first of its kind by offering only meat-free options in a relatively high-end setting. It's pegging itself as Dubai's first all-vegetarian lounge. Alexander Majala has that story.
Epitome is Dubai's first vegan and vegetarian bar which serves alcohol and shisha with the nightlife. The proprietor is hoping to break the stereotype that vegan food is only limited to salads by offering high-end meat-free food and drinks.
So if I'm a vegetarian guy, I would prefer to go to a place which cooks only vegetarian. I don't have to be scared that the same stuff is fried in a fish oil and the veg is being prepared on the same plate and everything. So that's why we open, and there's no place in Dubai which serves only veg food, and you can have alcohol and shisha as well. Either we have to go to a place which serves only veg food but no alcohol, or we go to a place which has alcohol vibes, but there's nothing on the menu for us. It's only a salad or a margarita.
Those who follow vegan diets can now enjoy their favorite dishes with alcoholic beverages and shisha. Before Epitome, customers had to go to separate venues for shisha and alcohol.
Well, actually, we really struggle. We've been vegan now for 2 years and we struggle in Dubai, so it's really nice to come to somewhere that has a proper vegan menu and is able to cater completely for our needs.
Ankit Sangvi, the restaurant owner, is vegan himself. The restaurant was established only 3 weeks ago and its menu includes Japanese, Chinese, Mexican and Thai mouth-watering culinary delicacies like Cantonese lotus crisps, Balinese tofu, as well as rice, rum and raisin tiramisu. Alexandria Majala for CGTN.
And on that hungry note, that's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. As always, we'd like to hear your thoughts on the content you've seen here in the last hour. Many ways to get your feedback back to us. All of them are on your screens right now. I'm Ramah Nyang in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Thank you for your company in the last hour. The World Today is up next from Washington, D.C.